as much as the work I have done in the past, at the point I'm present, there's still that thought of, well, is this actually what I... Hi, thank you for coming to my channel. Today we have another Grimoire Ramble, part 2 on how to be a gay witch. We have an illustration of Baba Yaga with the caption, "The filth is where the good things are," and today we're going to be talking about part 2 of how to be a gay witch while working on this Grimoire illustration. We're going to be talking about some recent news that may or may not have influenced my take, and particularly in today's video. We are going to be discussing what is filth and what it means to me, the myth of hypersexuality in queer spaces, blood, sweat, and other bodily fluids, the history of sex and kinks when it comes to LGBT queer history, divine and other performative filth, adult content history, as well as leaving with a free reading. And as you can tell, with the topics that we'll be going over, viewer discretion is advised. How are we doing today? Are we enjoying the new Pride intro? If everything's going well, I should have had 2 YouTube videos up already. The first one was the illustration of Santa Muerte, which we went over ancestors and death work when it comes to being a gay witch. And for this one, we're going over with Baba Yaga. Now, Baba Yaga is seen as such a crass and dirty and filthy dark goddess. And I think that there's a lot of connections within being queer and cultural perceptions of filth. So I'm going to first start with some recent news that is heavily influencing the content of today's Grimoire Ramble. Now, I know, it's news. Nobody wants to hear news, but unfortunately, this is important that we go over. So I'm going to hold your hand, and we are going to go through this together. So, it's Pride Month, and on June 2nd, so the second day of Pride Month, this article was released. Trump budget ends all CDC, so Center of Disease Control, HIV prevention programs, while maintaining care, treatment, and PrEP. What does that mean? The application towards looking for and searching for an HIV vaccine, gone. We are not going to be looking for an HIV vaccine going forward. And I think HIV and blood and this anonymous treatment of gay blood as an extension of filth is such a heavy topic that's like part 2 of what we'll be discussing. The second piece of news, at the time of me recording this, it is June 4th for those who are listening. King of the Hill actor Jonathan Joss' husband says that they were killed in a homophobic attack. Now, they say that it was a homophobic hate crime, and yet somehow, some way, all these different sources are saying no, that's not true. And when you get into it, when you look into it, you're telling me that they burned his house, attacked him, lynched him, while calling him homophobic slurs and mutilating and killing their dog, and that does not qualify as a hate crime. I think at that point, what we really need to discuss and come to terms with within how to be a queer witch and our queer identity is that this system is inherently seen us as an outsider. It is. That's just the truth of it. There's no way that anyone can rationally and logically follow that point of conclusion of somebody being attacked in a place that is historically against that certain identity, while also using terms aggressively and antagonizing towards that identity, and then not also claim that it is homophobic. There's no way you can rationally follow that. We have to understand as queer witches that our place and our identity inherently, whether or not we wish for it to do so, is anti-institutional. We may want to fit in. We may want to, in some cases, I've seen people who wanted to assimilate and become part of the oppressor. But all these attempts are for naught, because at the end of the day, the fact that you are you and the fact that you get joy and happiness for you is the problem. You should not exist. The world consistently claims, time and time again, several factors, one of which is that being gay is unnatural. And something we have to consider is that when you call someone a villain, that label eventually not only shapes your perceptions of that person or that community, but also that person and community has a reaction and response to that label. And sometimes that response is emboldening and it conforms to the shape of that label. And then sometimes there is that cognitive dissonance where you try to fight that. So that's where, someone calls you the villain and you say, well, if you already think I'm a villain because I won't let you hit my kid or XYZ thing, then I might as well cuss at you and tell you to leave me alone. Or you think I'm a villain? Fine, I'm walking away. I don't even want to be part of this anymore. And for queer people, it's again and again, you're unnatural, you're weird, you're dirty, you're filthy, you're disgusting. You don't belong in this world. And the reaction that we have, the response that we see in some spaces, the emboldening of it is, well, yeah, I am. I am unnatural. I am dirty. I am filthy. I am disgusting. Leave me alone. And the other half is, well, no, there's nothing unnatural being gay. There's hundreds of different types of animals that experience homosexual attraction, and that is true. Being gay is natural. Being gay naturally exists within the world, whether you like it or not. Not all animals and plants and everything excluded and in between exists within a gender binary of masculine and feminine and a heterosexual lens. You have animals, you have plants, you have things that don't qualify as either an animal or a plant. And I'm talking about you, mushrooms. You have things that consistently break the mold and rules of high school biology every single day. But still, the framework of being gay and unnatural, it consistently follows us to this day. Back about the news with funding towards an HIV vaccine being erased. I think something that if you weren't aware of, what you can get into, part of your ancestor work about learning about the AIDS and HIV epidemic, is that it was not always called AIDS. It was not always called HIV. It was originally called GRID, G-R-I-D, gay related immunodeficiency disease. And it was this belief that it was only part of gay communities. Something about being gay made you disgusting, made you filthy, made you dangerous to be around. Your sweat, your blood, your saliva, it's dangerous. And that was only after that they had located that it was transferred through bodily fluid exchange. Before that, it was your presence. It was your skin, your breath. Think about COVID in 2020 and the ways in which the whole world was, leave me alone. We have to socially isolate. We can't be around each other. And then think about it if it wasn't everyone. What if it was one group of people that the government hated, that the government actively encouraged your death and then promoted how disgusting and filthy you were for endangering the lives of everyone by being gay. Your skin, your breath, your touch, dangerous. That's how we get here. That's how we get here to queer filth. And this branch of queer filth extends into stereotypes and actively practicing efforts of homophobia to this day. There's this myth of hypersexuality within queerness, right? You see it in subtler forms such as like, well, why do kids want to be around drag queens to begin with? And then it ends at the under end with, well, you know, bisexuals are greedy, they can't pick a side. Transgender people, they're groomers, they're trying to grab all of our kids. And gay people, they literally make every decision on how many partners that they can sleep with. Some of them have gone up to 4 to 5 figure body counts. And they're just so inherently destructive. There's a myth of queer hypersexuality. They are extremely dangerous. They sleep around. That is a problem. But I bring up a counterpoint. And here's my counterpoint. I do not think that queer people are inherently hypersexual. And that extends not only to drag queens, transgender people, bisexual, lesbians, but even gay people. And I say even gay people because even in queer spaces, there is this belief that, no, well, we're all being queer, but gay people, they can be a bit much and sleep around. Even within the LGBT community where gay white men, arguably people with the most power and privilege, even they still face homophobia within their own community. There's no such thing as, well, because you are gay, you are dangerous and hypersexual. There are people who are hypersexual, who have a high sex drive. There are people who struggle with hypersexuality, but that does not become dictated and come from their identity. That comes from somewhere else. Why do kids like drag queens? I don't know. Maybe because they're tall and they're covered in glitter and they're colorful and the entire world is on fire in beige or white, lacking color, and nothing is fun anymore. And everything costs thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars for nothing. Not to get pessimistic, but maybe it's because they see something that's fun and they want to have fun. Well, I don't want to have my kids around drag queens. Then you need to have color and you need to have fun and you need to vote for it with your dollar. Because right now, there's not any fun in the world. Everything is something you have to spend money for or you have to do. Even things like journaling, right? Journaling. Literally getting to know yourself. All you need is a book and a pen. And somehow, well, first off, you need a really good book. I found this journal down the street. It's only $60. But then there's also the limited edition journals. You know, the ones with the leather, with the molding that are custom made just for you. And then there's these influencers with the journalings. You don't need that. It starts with the journals and then it gets to, well, you have a collection of journals and then a collection of pens and then a collection of bookmarks to help you in between your journaling. Because you need one journal for yourself and one journal for your activism, one journal for your spirituality, one journal for your eating habits. And at some point you have, what's that phrase? You have compartmentalized yourself into all these different categories where every single category isn't a hobby, it's a market that is purchasable. And that's who you are. A purchasable market. Going back, gay people are not inherently hypersexual. They're just sexual, if they are at that. Because there is an entire spectrum of people on the gray sexuality scale that goes all the way from allo to asexual to gray sexual to demisexual. People are. The fact of the matter is that the world is inherently sexual. There has been sex in art, in books, in everything about our world from our earliest records of history to now. There is commercials advertising everything from food to childcare to college to music to movies to everything above and under and over the sun using sex and sex appeal. The only difference is that it's straight, and we believe inherently that it's normal because we see it so often, and any deviation from it, aka homosexuality sex appeal, is considered divergent, and it stacks on itself to the point where we go, wait a minute, there's so much of this isn't normal. And the reality is, well, no, it's just doing it, it's just as much sex appeal, not really, but it's just as much sex appeal as the heterosexual markets, and it's catching up to the heterosexual market. There was an entire point where when I was on TikTok, I had to step back because all of my beautiful, soft, aesthetic cooking videos got covered and filled with videos of people who were less baking bread and more sleeping with the dough. Sex sells. It's in every field, in every category, whether we like it or not. Some of us, we really don't. And the truth is, gay people are not more hypersexual than their heterosexual counterparts. We just are. So, what is filth? If we understand filth to be a definition of things that are obscene, offensive language or printed material, corrupt behavior, and decadence, what is filth? And in this conversation, in this category, filth is just the act of being queer. It is. Filth is just being proud of who you are, because the idea of being queer is too obscene to show. The act of being queer is dangerous on sight. And that's really how we got to here we are today in the US, where LGBT spaces are at this time currently acceptable publicly and socially, but we only got here after fighting against obscenity laws that made it illegal to be LGBT in public, and in some cases in private. I think it's funny, there's lots of conversation about all the different ridiculous rules and laws that are made in the world, but at some point the conversations about, it's having gay panic, they do have a history, and the history comes from the fact that there are laws that prevent you from engaging in consensual sex with a person of the same gender. Let's forget about people who don't get to give consent, who are children who have babies forced upon them. Let's forget about that, and instead let's worry about the gays. Filth in this mindset as a queer witch is saying, absolutely not. I'm not going to be ashamed of who I am. I'm not going to be afraid of who I am. There is nothing wrong with who I am, or even right with who I am. I just am, and I'm going to continue to be just amming every day. And your belief, your inherent insistence that there's something wrong with me, it's not going to stay. It doesn't matter. And honestly, you should be worrying about things that are actually important, like the fact that we have such a high homeless population, or the fact that we actually have issues in this world, in this country, that need to be addressing, like our roads that are falling apart, or the children who aren't getting fed, or the people who are dying because they lack health care. There are more important things for you to worry about than who do I take to the bedroom, or in some cases, who I don't get to take to the bedroom. Because some of us are shy. Being a gay, queer witch and facing filth means saying, you know what, at some point I have to understand that my identity is anti the institution. And what that means for me is that all the resources I'm going to be able to find, be it published books, movies, whatever, it's gonna be inherently in some way pro the institution that holds it. So on my altar, And in my practice, I need to give myself permission to put it in whatever it needs to be in my life. That might mean including things that are NSFW on your altar. That might mean not including things that are NSFW on your altar. That might mean having confetti from your pride parade that you went to. That might mean saying, I'm going to include parts of my identity on my altar in ways that I'm not seeing in a typical Wiccan book. Because guess what? They can only take you so far. They can only take you so far. You can read all the different books, but at some point you have to say, my life and who I am cannot be dictated by a book that was sold to me for $14.99. I'm worth more than $14.99. Editing Alex here, and can I say I've always wanted to say that. So I don't really have a point where I could fit all of this in, but I forgot that I wanted to mention this, that a good point of disgust and filth, and just honestly like that bad reputation that a lot of people feel, that I will be touching on in the next video with anger, is specifically how men within like the queer community have this very unique experience of participating and being part of this culture that is so inherently sexualizing to everything. Not that there's anything wrong with that, while also being the object of desire themselves. And it's not solely, queer gay men that experience this, but that is like a huge point of it that brings it up to the next thing I wanted to mention, was fat shaming and hating your body so much, nitpicking, body dysmorphia. And honestly, this idea that you are here on this earth because you're meant to be loved. And if you can't find someone to love you for who you are, your body, especially if you look in the mirror and you are not your own type, which I know a lot of us do feel, then you are inherently disgusting, less than worthless, yuck mouth garbage. Now, obviously, there's a lot of nuance to this, especially since we are talking about like the whole queer community, and I'm just mentioning specifically on the point of gay men and how there is a community of gay men, or rather, I'm just going to say gay men in lieu of men loving men or amen loving amen bodies, of people who felt so empowered and so strengthened within their own bodies, especially as fat people. And not fat as a derogative, but as a self-descriptive, that they made their own pride flag called the Bear Pride Flag. And that's something to mention specifically, is pride in who you are, pride in the body that you're in. You were not born on this earth to be fuckable. I should probably mute that part out. But you are not here on this earth to be desired, right? You give your own life and your own reason for living purpose. And the second thing I forgot to mention that I don't have a good time to just cut it in here is that very often these allegations of grooming and sexual assault and harassment and all these different ways that typically but not always conservative voices are targeting LGBT communities, most often than not, they are accusations while also confessions in their own right. So this whole claim of being so dirty and filthy and disgusting that we as queer people have to endure every day often come from voices that actually their reality reflects this disgusting transgressiveness that they actually possess. They're pointing fingers at the queer community and saying every single one of those people, if they're people at that, are pedophiles, and yet looking back, the shoes matching their own words. So that's just something I really wanted to include in the section real quick that I forgot to originally record, and I did not want to just splice it in. But specifically, one, the part of having a body that is so inherently like disgusting through your own point of view while other people desiring it, but trying to escape that point of view while also recognizing that you are not meant to be put on this earth to be desired. And then the second thing specifically being that these spaces that are inherently labeling and placing all these accusations will also be in confessions at the same time. That's something that to consider when you're looking to be how you can include and be a queer gay witch, and you're trying to face and confront those feelings of fear and disgust and shame in all different ways. Not so much me giving you the answer to the question that you have, but more so me pointing that out and saying this is something that you consider, that you can choose what answer that you need for you and your practice. Okay, editing Alex out. And the thing is, like, blood already has such a heavy stigma to it in witchcraft spaces and also just publicly. It does. There's an entire half of this population that when they bleed, we bully them and make fun of them for it. And it's not a mistake. You know, it's not like they accidentally start bleeding. They have a cycle where this happens regularly. They regularly bleed. We've always known that they bleed. And somehow we say, this thing that naturally happens to your body is unnatural. Blood magic and all that heavy taboo stuff, heavy conversations, we're not going to get heavily into it. But what I am going to touch on is that if you are going back to how people react to labels, if we are, as queer people, feeling emboldened by us being called unnatural and filthy, then I would expect to see people to do more blood magic. I would expect to see people be more out and proud in disgusting, filthy ways. One of the examples within gay history of accepting filth, accepting the sexual stigma, and doing something is AIDS activists using a giant condom over a senator's home. Think about that. Imagine leaving to go get Dunkin' or something. You come home and your home is inside of a giant condom that's blown up. I'm looking at it right now. A condom to stop unsafe politics. Helms is deadlier than a virus. That's what it says. On the condom, at least. I consistently think to myself, as a queer witch, how can I make my practice queerer? How can I make it gayer? How can I make it sharper and with an edge? I don't want to dull in my teeth. I want to sharpen it. I want to make it gay as much as possible, queer as much as possible. Recently, for myself, and I'm just going to speak for myself, what I've been working on is walking away from the stigma of gay and queer sexual shame. Now, I'm not saying we should all go out and throw away our Bibles, throw away the Wiccan read, throw away all that, and fill our altar with smut. Unless that's what you want to do, in which case, you do you. But what I'm actively approaching is, why was my ancestor work from before only following on the ancestors of the past? What about the ancestors of today? What about the people who are actively working on creating the queer spaces online and in person today? And inevitably, we have people who are making art that is safe for work and people who are making work that is non-safe for work. Why do I have neither on my altar? Why do I have all of this artwork from the past and I wasn't taking the time then to outwardly go and collect work of art in different places on my altar in my practice today for the queer and gay people today as they are? Now, don't get me wrong. I can sound very soft and have a kind voice, but I still feel sometimes like a jaded cynic. I don't like the Ten of Cups from the Urban Tarot because for me, the Ten of Cups brings up all of these emotions and all of these feelings I have about places that are set up and said to be inherently safe and they're not safe. And that's not to talk any smack about prides in general, but I've had personal experiences where I went to pride events and I spoke to other queer people and there were racism, or there was biphobia, or transphobia, or ableism, or fat shaming, or misogyny. And yes, I know that card has 2 women in it, But I'm just saying, from my own perspective, going back to how people react to labels, I didn't want to, and this is just a possibility I'm bringing up for you, I didn't want to softly go into the identity and say I'm one of the good queers. I didn't want to do that. And I still don't. I want my altar to honor and have a place for the ancestors of the past. I want to honor and have a place for the queer people today as they are. What I want is for a queer influence in my practice that feels real. And it doesn't feel real to me. It doesn't feel authentic and real to me if I'm worried more about being palatable and I worry more about being acceptable to corporations than I do about being authentically present in here and being and having stuff that is considered filthy and dirty and dark and whatever feels authentic. It does feel authentically here, right? I don't want pride to look like, at least in my own point of view on my altar, right? If this is what you want on your altar, do that. But this is the filth episode, okay? That's not meant to be condescending. I'm just saying this is what we're talking about. For me, I don't want my altar to be covered in rainbow flags unless it's the intersectional rainbow flag, right? I love rainbows, love them to bits, but I want mine to feel more like a community hangout and less like a sponsorship from a corporation. You know, all those companies that all of a sudden forgot about Pride this year, I don't want them on my altar. They're not welcome to my altar. They can go back to what they were doing before, which was probably saying how much they care about their customers and they care about the LGBT community while building war weapons to commit acts of crime, acts of war crimes across the world. And the fact of the matter is as we headed into pink and rainbow capitalism within recent years, a lot of people also felt a similar way. Not about their altars, but about wanting a real and authentic queerness. And part of that was that corporations walked away from the quote-unquote filthiness, at least in my point of view. They walked away from the fact that A, bodies are sometimes gross, and B, hey, we did kind of just spend a couple hundred years saying that these people were inherently dangerous and dirty to be around, and then all of a sudden, you know, all these different banks and engineering firms all of a sudden are perfectly okay with them. All we have to do, and I mean this, all we have to do is we have to be good, quiet gays who mind our place and shut our mouths and just kick out everyone within the community that bank of whoever doesn't want. You know, what we can do is we can start with the leather community, and then we can work on the pup community, and we can work on all these other communities that we're just going to call communities, and we're just going to kick them out. Kind of just like, you know, forget about the part where during the AIDS epidemic where we were seen so disgusting that they didn't even want to feed us. They wanted us to starve to death. Forget that. People who were part of the leather community broke into homes and took all the leather and all the gay stuff out just to give a chance of a regular burial for someone who they considered family. I cannot understand. I could not believe and imagine what it would feel like to have your closest family member die, and then to know that not only are they dead, but you do not get to have a second of normalcy. You have to go into their home and take everything about who they really were away, so that people who never cared to get to know them can walk in and pretend to care for 5 minutes. And you can't share this or talk about this. In the next Grimoire Ramble, which I feel like you're getting keys of like what we're going to be discussing. We're going to be discussing queer anger. But when it comes to this episode, when it comes to filth, and fighting corporate sponsorship and showing up at the altar with things that feel authentically queer, even if it's weird, even if it's sexual, even if it's not in a book anywhere, I include things that were given to me. I include in my grimoires illustrations that I've drawn of Tom of Finland's artwork. I include bottles of VHS cleaner that was given to me unopened. I have things that remind me about what the queer community authentically was and is, with or without a corporate sponsorship. And I keep that on my altar. And I remember that the ancestor work from the last Grimoire Ramble, it doesn't start and end with the ancestors of the past that I morally agree with their decisions. It continues to the LGBT queer community today. And I'm gonna be honest, it's hard for me as a person to look at the decisions that they've made and try to place any morally, well, they did the right thing or they did the wrong thing, considering that I can only say for myself, well, this is how I think I would have reacted or how I think I would have responded. And what I mean by that is I can say, well, if it wasn't accepted for being queer at all, I would never become a sex worker. That's disgusting. But in my experience, I was only ever homeless for a couple months, and it was in a time where everyone culturally, for the most part, was LGBT acceptive for one of the first times in US history. So I wasn't there, and I don't get to say, well, I would have done something different, because we don't know. And I'm not going to look at people of the past who've made decisions that people call disgusting and filthy and dirty and not pretend like they made that choice because they thought that was the best thing that they could have done. Because it probably was the best thing that they could have done. Sometimes I think about having representations of queer filth. For example, Divine, the drag queen, and putting her on my altar. And I think about that, but I hesitate because I wonder about the place of filth on my altar and what would it mean for me if I put Divine on my altar. I think today, in today's society, unless you are a man willing to hit a woman or you're a woman willing to serve for the rest of your life, we are currently in a paradigm where you are socially unacceptable. And at the same time, me including Divine on my altar, I wonder if that would participate and act as, I guess, like a talisman of filth of sorts, or if it only works as a placeholder. I mean, been there, done that, got the t-shirt, got the promotion. I saw Pink Flamingos. I know what that movie is. I've seen it. Have I seen all of John Waters' films? Absolutely not. But I know who Divine is. And for me, maybe I feel like there's a lack of authenticness to only seeing one of the movies and placing Divine on my altar. But then again, I think about how, because I don't want to be murdered and because I don't want to feel ashamed for something that I know is just a state of being, it's not right, it's not wrong, it just is. I think about how that's anti-institutional and just how unaccepting and unbelievably obscene it is for me not to be ashamed of that. And how, for me at least, and this might be some parts that you want to take notes on for your practice, the path for me on realizing it's not right, it's not wrong, it just is, came from different queer stories, and me wanting to place emphasis on those queer stories through my journey as it is, on and off the altar. It's irreplaceable. It's me writing my own series of correspondences, but it's also irrelevant at the same time. I'm very happy that some of us got to experience gayness by YouTubing gay scenes from Glee on YouTube. Some of us got to have a lot more wilder times. Not me. I've never shaved my head, put a wig on my scalp like a skull mullet, walked into a diner, and then shoplifted a steak like Divine. I've never done that. All I know is that being anti-institutional has the expectation that you are antagonistic, that you are violent, that you want to cause problems, you want to cause fights, you want to scream, yell, and shout. You want to go out into the street and throw bricks. And I don't want that, right? I don't know about you, but I'd rather just be at peace. Maybe that's laziness, okay? Maybe it's entitlement. But maybe I just rather we just not fight and just move on, work on issues that are actually present. And this isn't me getting on a soapbox and say, well, what about this or what about that? It's just me saying, yeah, I want Divine on my altar, but as much as the work I have done in the past, at the point I'm present, there's still that thought of, well, is this actually what I want? Or is it just that Divine is the closest representation I have to performing filth as a queer person? And am I still afraid as a goth and alternative person of going out there and what people are going to do at the sight of not only a queer person, but a person who is bold enough to not only be queer and alternative? And the caption, "The filth is where the good things are," from Baba Yaga, I reflect on that. And I say, what are the things that I'm afraid to share? What are the things that I want to hide and I don't want to open up about? And I've been working for several years on opening that up and sharing it and being more aware of what that hesitancy does to me in different ways, that my fear of filthy, my fear of public disdain and public disgust at me, the ways in which I celebrate that and I give that more power than I'm willing to give myself. I think there was a study somewhere, and I promise you I'm not going to look it up because I don't want another thing to link down, unless I actually decide to link it down underneath. But there was a study somewhere where people were shown things that were disgusting, and they were asked to vote and scale and rate their opinions on quote-unquote controversial things. And what they had found is that when people were shown things that were disgusting, they were more likely to be homophobic. And I think that gut reaction to disgust and filth, and the way that it is tied to being queer and gay, and the way that me as a queer and gay witch, I think it all just boils down to, I know people aren't going to like me. I know they have that expectations of me. I know that people see me as inherently dirty and filthy and disgusting, and I don't want to care. I talked about quote-unquote dirty, filthy, disgusting things on my altar, and things I did not include was makeup. I'm an assigned male at birth body. The fact that I'm willing to paint my nails or wear eyeshadow is disgusting to some people. And yet, I have my highlighter, I have my body glitter, my blush. I love blush so much that it might actually even put Trixie Mattel to shame. That's how much I love blush. I put makeup brushes and body glitter, and I do all these things when I have the energy to do so. And the functions of how I am as a gay witch and queer witch after all that ancestor work is, how do I want to engage in these dynamics? How do I want to include my identity in a way where I have to understand that the books and formatting that's been given to me does not include, it inherently does not include the representation that I need. I don't need a $14.99 or a $29.99 book on how to queer the tarot and queer the practice and queer scrying and queer the runes. I don't need that. I mean, I would like it. I would like to read it. But I'm more likely to get an authentic look into who I am and what that queerness would look like within my practice from a zine that I found on the side of the road or in a particularly dive bar energy location than I would from a Barnes & Noble. I think a lot of the witchcraft practice that people don't want to share is it's not all buying things. It's not all buying tarot decks and working in your grimoire. A lot of it is just doing. It's doing the not being okay and thinking about the same conversation, the same topic, the same theme again and again and again, like a song that repeats in your mind until you can figure out how you actually feel. And I think that I want to be frank about my privilege. I think I'm very lucky, and I would actually say extraordinarily lucky, that I was not raised with any Christian shame in the way of being afraid and ashamed and disgusted at myself or feeling that pressure from the outside for not being Christian. I don't feel that way at all. I don't. But there was a lot of sexual shame and abstinence-only teaching. And I think that when it comes to filth and my practice that maybe you can listen at and hear from is I try to consider how much filth can I add to my practice versus how much needs to be there. Like, I want my practice to not be a snapshot, but an actual living, breathing on its own energy community of its own. But I also wonder if it's necessary and if it's needed. Or if I'm using that filth and I'm using this, and this is the key for the next Grimoire Ramble, if I'm using that as a distraction from my anger and the ways that I can actively be using my space and my place as a queer witch to the best of my capabilities. Maybe being queer and, including quote unquote the dirty, filthy, disgusting, whatever that may be, maybe that will have more of a place for you than it will for me. Maybe not, right? But something I want you to consider is that the things that you feel shameful about, that shame is not inherently an indication of it being morally right or wrong. It's just a reflection of your shame. It's just a reflection of the perceptions of filth. So I think that leaves you with a lot to think about, and also a lot to maybe reflect on and include in your practice. Maybe you can create a list of things that you personally feel shame over. Maybe you could evaluate why you feel shame over that, and maybe test out including that onto your spiritual spaces and see how that works out for you. But I think from now, let's go ahead and head into wrapping this up and going with the reading at the end. So what I'll be using is the Moon Power Tarot by Charlie Quintero. And this deck, the reason why I'm using this deck in particular, even though I wouldn't categorize it as a pride deck, is because the creator of this deck, pulling the deck out right now, I believe has a company called Sick Sad Girls. Yes, sicksadgirls.com. And that company itself is working on a series of decks. But one of the creators, Camille Samooch, has made a deck called Naughty by Nature Tarot. And this deck it's sexual, it's alternative, it's crass. I think in many ways it's like the epitome. By the way, I'm saying this with all respect, and I love this deck. But it's almost sometimes like the epitome or the antithesis of like the opposite of what we would consider typical or normal quote-unquote witchcraft aesthetics. Like the idea that we have like of a woman in the middle of the woods as all cottage core, it's all aged and dark and scary. And I'm looking at it right now, this Naughty by Nature Tarot. And this one is like, it's weird, it's quirky, it's naughty by nature, and it's definitely kind of giving like Newgrounds energy from like back in the day. So I think I don't want to share like the artwork in the way that I typically do on YouTube, because while I do think there's nothing wrong with it, I also recognize that, hey, I like to keep my videos up, please. So pulling from that connection from someone who's actively created from the same space, at least together as a collective, I'm pulling a card from the Moon Power Tarot. And this is going to be on how can we as a collective, what can you take from this? What can you walk away from this? You can think about, you can meditate on. What can you work with to include within your own understandings of filth and disgust and I guess just like grossness? Like, what can you take from that? And what can you walk away with that and put it into your practice? And what we have is the Five of Swords. And dare I say, she's serving. So we see a woman with pink hair and almost like a series of chains dripping over her face and her hair. And she has these ear gauges on. And she has almost like a crown of swords behind her head sticking out. And it's giving that she's looking forward in a place of determination, in a place of power. And she's definitely does not look afraid. She's dead set on who she is as a person. I think this might be, it's definitely just going to pull the card, like a really great card to pull for this. So with the Five of Swords, the most common definition that I see is like winning at all costs. You know, your ambition, you're betraying everyone who's known you, you're being deserted by your community, there's conflict, but you're walking away and you're victorious, even if it means that you have to screw everyone else over just to get there. And I think why this is such a great card, and I heard this conversation recently, was that it can take you a couple years to fully come to terms and contact with like who you are as a person. And when you come out, you've had that conversation with yourself for years, and everyone else has had that conversation starting that day. As a result, with like those labels that we talked about, they're going to be thrown at you. You're changed, you're a different person, I don't even recognize you anymore. And I think that that the image of like the villain, for example, can easily be thrown at you, right? We're talking about disgust and filth here. Of course the villain can be thrown at you. You're ruining everything. You could have had a perfectly white, beautiful wife with a white picket fence and 2.5 kids and a dog. Like, why didn't you do this? You threw this away, and for what? For 5 seconds of attention? And what the Five of Swords would do and come in is, as we've discussed earlier, with that reflection of the label either being emboldened or walking away from it, it would be saying, this is me. This is my life, not yours. And I don't have to base my decisions and my life around the functions of how acceptable I am to other people who don't even get to know me. Not everyone has to have the privilege to be able to contact you and get to know you. And in their minds, you're betraying them. You're cutting them off. You have crossed the line. And you are. You have done that. By loving yourself. By showing up. By accepting and saying, you think this is too much and you think this is too far, but all I am doing is physically just being here. I am just showing up for myself. And that cunningness and that betrayal all comes from the determination to say, who am I? And how do I get there? And seeing that thread that connected you from who you were to that point, and following that thin, beautiful line wherever it goes. The Five of Swords in this case is saying, yeah, a lot of people are going to feel betrayed. A lot of people might feel like you've gone too far. But the winning at all costs, the winning at the end of the race, is just you waking up and being happy with who you are. It's not you killing an entire family and an entire village full of people, poisoning the water supply, burning the crops. It's just you waking up. And like, God forbid you dye your hair or you get a piercing, and then all of a sudden you're the most disgusting thing on this earth. You are literally just making choices that would make you happy. And being willing to say, you know what? I understand that that's how you feel. That is how you feel. Your feelings are giving you information about the situation, but they are not the situation in of itself. As it is, I'm doing what I believe is the right thing, and I'm doing what I believe is the thing that makes me happy at the end of the day. And if you are not happy and you are not okay because you think what I'm doing is too far, then I'll just have to remind you that this is my life, and these are my consequences to endure. You may say, and just to touch on the blood and another taboo of like tattooing, I saw this quote, I love it. You may say that your body is a temple, but this is my temple and this is my life that it is devoted to. Do not tell me, since you do not worship at this temple, how it is that this place should be of honor. So I think that suitably wraps everything up. I think that there's a lot more we can get into, maybe off YouTube, a bit more pertinent on discuss and filth and queer identities in ways that we think can include it. Maybe at a separate time I would have a Patreon, or I don't know, a website or something, God forbid, where I can share it and not have to worry about a YouTube video being taken down. But I think this answers the prompt of the tarot card, at least. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining. Like, comment, subscribe, all that if you wish. And thank you so much, and goodbye for now.